Nancy once told me that loving her was the only way I'd ever be happy. She was wrong, because loving her was the reason I lost everything. It was a rainy evening when the news broke about her family's collapse. Headlines screamed the bankruptcy of the Lee Corporation, her family's empire. I was the one who stepped into the wreckage. I offered my resources, my name, my influence to keep her company alive. When she signed the marriage papers, her hands trembled, eyes bloodshot. I thought it was gratitude. It was a calculation. Our marriage was never announced. She didn't want the world to know I existed. In public, she draped herself over Edward's arm. The same Edward who used to work under me before she dragged him into her spotlight. The same man who smirked whenever I walked past, as if I were the extra in my own life. I told myself it was fine, that one day she would grow tired of him, remember who stood by her during her darkest hour, and return. But the truth came on my wedding anniversary. That night, I had cooked a full dinner. Hours of preparation, every dish her favorite. By midnight, the candles had burned low, the food cold. Just as I was about to throw it all away, my phone rang. Her name lit the screen. Henry, Royal Swan Hotel, private room 805. Her voice was calm, almost bored. I didn't ask questions. I wanted to believe she'd remembered the date, and wanted to surprise me. I hurried there, heart pounding, imagining her smile when she saw me. The door opened to laughter. A banner hung across the room. Congratulations, Edward, accepted to graduate school. Nancy stood at his side, her hand curled around his arm. Her eyes found mine, lips curling. See, I told you he'd come, such a loyal fool. The people around her laughed. Someone muttered, he doesn't even know he's just her backup. I turned to leave, but the door was locked. Hands pushed me toward the table, pouring glass after glass of alcohol into me. The world tilted. For a moment, I thought I was back in my kitchen, cold dinner waiting. Then a shock of ice water hit my face. Edward's voice cut through the noise. Stay away from Nancy, she's mine. Laughter followed, sharp and merciless. I stumbled out hours later, my pride shredded. The rain outside soaked through my clothes. I should have gone home. Instead, I found myself in a hotel room, my memory fractured. A woman I barely knew claimed I'd forced myself on her. Her accusations spread online within hours. Detailed, convincing, meant to destroy me. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Edward had paid her, but when I confronted Nancy, she only arched an eyebrow. Do you really think people will believe you over me? Her calmness was worse than any rage. I could have let it go. But then the calls began, numbers I didn't know, voices spitting curses, threats. My name dragged through the mud until my own business partners started avoiding me. I told her we needed to end it. Divorce? She repeated, her lips twisting. Only if you die, Henry. 2 weeks later, the hospital called. My parents had been in a crash. They didn't survive. The police report said the driver, my father, had been distracted by repeated calls from Nancy. She'd wanted them to talk me out of leaving her. Grief cracked something inside me. I searched for the jade pendant my mother had given me, the one she'd told me to keep close, always. It was gone. Nancy admitted she'd given it to Edward. He'd lost it. I stood there, trembling, rage and grief twisting together until I could barely breathe. She reached for me. I stepped back. You win, Nancy, I whispered. Because after tonight, you'll never have to think about me again. The knife in my hand felt cold and certain. Her scream was the last thing I heard before the floor rushed up to meet me. When I woke up in the hospital, Sandra was there. She had been my business partner once, years ago, before life had pulled us apart. She told me she'd take me somewhere far from Nancy, somewhere I could heal. I didn't have the strength to refuse. Months passed. Sandra became my anchor, her quiet presence steadying the chaos in my mind. When news came that Nancy had been parading in public again, calling herself the woman I would always return to, Sandra simply squeezed my hand. She can't imagine you've already moved on. She was right, because the day I returned to the city, cameras caught me at the airport. Nancy stood waiting with flowers. I walked past her without stopping, Sandra's hand in mine. We're getting married, I told the reporters. The flashbulbs lit the bitterness in Nancy's eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Most people think stories of love and ruin begin with betrayal. Mine began with trust, an open door that should have stayed locked. My name is Henry Zhao, heir to Zhao Holdings, a company my family has spent 3 generations building from the ground up. My father taught me that wealth means nothing if it's not paired with responsibility. My mother taught me that strength is measured by how you treat people when they're at their weakest. Somewhere along the way, I let those lessons blind me to the truth. Some people see kindness as a weakness to exploit. Nancy Lee entered my life in a blaze of soft smiles and poised confidence. She was the kind of woman who drew attention without trying, every movement calculated yet seeming effortless. We first crossed paths at a charity auction. She was on the stage, bidding for a piece of art I had been eyeing all evening. Her determination made me curious. When I eventually outbid her, she didn't scowl or sulk. She walked right up to me, congratulated me, and then, without hesitation, offered to buy it from me at double the price. I refused, of course. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I wanted to see her reaction. She smiled, thanked me for my time, and walked away without another word. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time Nancy had turned a loss into an opportunity. Our second meeting was less coincidental. She was introduced to me at a networking event for young entrepreneurs. By then, I knew of her, Nancy, daughter of the Lee family, owners of a conglomerate spanning real estate, fashion, and import businesses. She carried herself like someone who had been trained to never let the public see a crack in her armor. We exchanged polite words, nothing more. But in the weeks that followed, I noticed we kept crossing paths, at board dinners, charity galas, even the occasional coffee shop. It looked like chance, though later I would learn nothing in Nancy's world was left to chance. At the time, I saw only her ambition and thought it admirable. I mistook calculated moves for genuine connection. When my mother passed away unexpectedly, Nancy was one of the first to call. Her voice was gentle, her condolences carefully chosen. She sent flowers, handwritten notes, small gestures that left an impression. It didn't matter that our conversations were shallow, I was lonely, and she filled the silence. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Dinners became late-night talks. Late-night talks became trips out of the city. We weren't in love, not yet, but there was something there, something I thought could become love if I nurtured it. She knew how to make me feel important without making it obvious she was doing so. Looking back, I can see that I was always the one moving toward her. She was never moving toward me. Then came the collapse of the Lee Corporation. It was sudden, brutal, and public. The media swarmed their headquarters, creditors circled like vultures. Nancy's parents disappeared from the spotlight, leaving her to take the blows. I remember the day she called me, her voice flat, asking if I could meet her. We sat across from each other in a cafe with peeling wallpaper and a broken espresso machine. She didn't cry, she didn't plead, she simply said, "It's over." I should have walked away. Instead, I offered her a way out, a merger, on paper, marriage, in reality. With my resources, I could stabilize her company, protect her name, give her the space to rebuild. She hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. Her signature on the marriage license was shaky, but her eyes held no trace of gratitude, only resolve. From the very beginning, Nancy set the terms. Our marriage would be private, unannounced. She claimed it was to protect the company's image, but the truth was simpler. She didn't want the world to know she belonged to me. In public, she appeared alone or with Edward, an ambitious, smooth-talking man who had once been a junior executive at Jow Holdings before I let him go for unethical behavior. I thought it was a temporary arrangement. I thought she needed a shield, someone to play a role while we rebuilt her world together. I was wrong. Edward was everything I despised in a man, opportunistic, shallow, and desperate for validation. He thrived in Nancy's orbit, feeding off her connections while flattering her in ways I never did. To me, love was steady and practical. To them, it was a performance for an audience that never stopped watching. Still, I told myself to be patient. I reminded myself of the nights we'd spent talking about the future, about the kind of empire we could build together. I convinced myself she would eventually see Edward for what he was and return to me. My patience became my prison. Sandra's name hadn't been in my thoughts for years by that point. We'd met long before Nancy, when I was still learning to navigate the business world. Sandra. Anne was sharp, unafraid to speak her mind, and carried an air of warmth that disarmed even the most ruthless negotiators. We'd shared a mutual respect, but timing and ambition had pulled us in different directions. She left for an overseas tour, and I buried myself in work. In some alternate version of my life, maybe Sandra would have been the one to call me during my grief. maybe she would have been the one standing beside me when the storms came. But that wasn't the path I had chosen. I had chosen Nancy. Our home was a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, but it might as well have been two separate apartments. She occupied her world: galas, interviews, luncheons with people whose approval she craved. I occupied mine: board meetings, project launches, quiet dinners eaten alone. The only time our schedules overlapped was when she needed something: a signature, a transfer, a bailout. It wasn't all cold. Sometimes, in rare unguarded moments, I caught glimpses of a woman who could have been my partner in more than name. She'd laugh at something ridiculous on television, curl up beside me on the sofa, and for a few minutes, we'd be just Henry and Nancy, not the heirs, not the strategists, just two people sharing a space. But those moments were fleeting, and they always came with a price. The first crack in my restraint came on our anniversary. I had prepared an elaborate dinner, her favorites, the table set, candles lit. She didn't come home. When she finally called, it was to summon me to a hotel room where Edward's celebration was in full swing. The look in her eyes when she saw me wasn't a surprise, it was triumph, as if my arrival had been the punchline to a joke only she was in on. That night, humiliation sank into my bones. Edward's words, the crowd's laughter, the cold water dripping down my neck, every detail etched into memory. And through it all, Nancy watched with a slight smile, as if testing how much I would endure. I endured a lot, more than I should have, because deep down, I still wanted to believe the woman I married wasn't a complete fabrication. I wanted to believe there was something real buried under ambition and cruelty. It was that belief that would keep me tethered to her longer than I should have been, and it was that same belief that would eventually shatter when I learned just how far she and Edward were willing to go. But before everything came crashing down, before the accusations, the betrayals, and the long, slow road to freedom, there was simply this: a man who had chosen the wrong woman, and a woman who had chosen herself over everyone else. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Sandra, unaware of the storm she was walking into, was on her way back into my life. The first blow didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, disguised as a phone call that should have meant something good. It was a Wednesday evening, one of those strange midweek days when the city seemed to move slower than usual. I had left the office early, determined to avoid the hollow silence of the penthouse. Nancy's name flashed across my screen. For a moment, I thought she might be calling to check on me, to ask if I'd eaten. Instead, she said, "Henry, Royal Swan Hotel, private room 805. Her tone was neutral, clipped, as if she were giving directions to a delivery driver. I almost didn't go, but it was our wedding anniversary, and a part of me still clung to the idea that she had remembered. I arrived in a tailored suit, holding a box with a bracelet I had commissioned months ago. When I opened the door, the sound hit me first: laughter, clinking glasses, music spilling from speakers. A banner stretched across the room. "Congratulations, Edward, for being accepted to graduate school." Nancy stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his chest as if she had always belonged there. The crowd's eyes shifted toward me, curious, amused. She smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan unfold. "See, I told you he'd come. Such a loyal man." Her words were met with chuckles, some openly mocking. I caught a whisper, "Doesn't even know he's the backup." I turned to leave, but the door was locked. Several of Edward's friends stepped in front of me, grinning as they shoved glasses of liquor into my hands. "Stay a while, celebrate with us." Refusing wasn't an option. The alcohol burned my throat, my mind fogging with each swallow. By the time I stumbled into the hallway, my head was swimming, my stomach churning. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room that wasn't mine. Beside me, a woman I barely recognized sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaking her face. "You were drunk," she said, voice trembling. You forced yourself on me." The words didn't fit. I searched my memory, trying to piece together the night. Nothing came. I told her it was impossible, that I had been too drunk to even stand properly. She shook her head, insisting it had happened. Hours later, the story was online. Her post was detailed, emotional, and written to incite outrage. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with messages, some from people I knew, most from strangers telling me to rot in hell. I confronted Nancy that evening. She was in the living room, legs crossed, scrolling through her tablet. When I told her the accusation was false, she didn't look up. "Do you really think anyone will believe you?" she asked. The casual cruelty in her voice was more sobering than anything I had heard all day. I didn't answer. Instead, I called a lawyer, filed a defamation suit, and hired an investigator. It didn't take long to find the truth. Edward had paid the woman to stage the entire scene. I sent him a message with the evidence attached. Either he and the woman posted a public apology, or I would take them both to court. Nancy arrived at my office later that week, Edward in tow. He dropped to his knees the moment he saw me. "I'm sorry, Henry, it was just a joke. I didn't think it would go this far." Nancy bent to help him up, her voice soft, almost protective. "Don't kneel, he won't actually do anything to you." Her defense of him was the final insult. I opened my phone, scrolling through the hundreds of abusive messages I'd received since the accusation. "Read them," I told her. She skimmed a few before setting the phone down. "You're a man," she said. "You'll recover. Edward won't. Without his degree, he'll have nothing." I almost laughed. "Without my name, I'll have nothing," I said. "I've already been expelled from the business school we both fought to get into." She blinked, surprised. Then her expression hardened. "You'll still be rich. You'll still have your company. He doesn't have that safety net." The conversation ended with me walking out. For the first time, I considered divorce not as a threat, but as a necessity. The pressure didn't stop. If anything, it grew. Anonymous accounts flooded social media, painting me as a predator using my wealth to silence victims. No matter how much evidence I released, the comments twisted ever. I fact into something ugly. I traced the accounts back to a PR firm, one Nancy had used before. I confronted her again. Her answer was simple. So what if it was me? No denial, no attempt to hide it, as if destroying me publicly was just another item on her to-do list. Something inside me gave way. The next words left my mouth before I had time to stop them. "Let's divorce." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "We'll talk in person, I'm busy." Days later, I found myself in the middle of a meeting that should have been routine. The proposal in front of me was worth billions, an overseas expansion that could redefine my company's future. The representative was Sandra. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's been a while, Henry." I nodded, unsure what to say. She didn't waste time. "I'm here for business, but also, I still like you. I think I always did." Her honesty caught me off guard. "I'm married," I reminded her. "I know," she said. "I'll wait." Nancy came home drunk that night. She clung to me, murmuring, "We won't divorce." I asked her why. Her answer was a low, poisonous whisper. "Because I want you miserable forever." The words should have shocked me. They didn't. I simply lit a cigarette and said, "Let's divorce. I'll make it worth your while." Her response was to hurl a glass at the wall. A week later, Sandra came to deliver urgent documents. Nancy arrived minutes later, her gaze flicking between us. "If this is why you want a divorce," she said coldly, "then I refuse even more." Sandra's voice was calm but cutting. "You cheat and still call others shameless?" The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut. I pushed Sandra toward the elevator, not wanting the argument to escalate. Nancy's voice followed me. "Cheating, Henry? Is that what you call it?" I turned. "Did you ever think about having a husband when you were with Edward?" Her silence was enough. I wish I could say that was the moment I walked away, but the truth is, the chains weren't broken yet. What came next would make sure they never came back. There's a point where anger burns so long it stops feeling like fire. It becomes something colder, heavier, like a stone in your chest that you carry everywhere. That's what Nancy had given me. The days after my last confrontation with her moved in slow motion. I'd wake before dawn, not because I wanted to, but because sleep refused to stay. The penthouse felt bigger when she wasn't there, though even her absence didn't bring relief. Her perfume lingered in the curtains, a scent that once made me think of warmth but now only smelled like deceit. I buried myself in work, staying at the office until my eyes blurred from staring at the same contracts. It didn't matter, no amount of figures or deals could distract me from the messages that still poured into my phone, anonymous threats, insults, reminders that my reputation had been shredded beyond repair. Some came with photos of my face edited onto criminals' bodies. Others were recordings of people spitting curses into the microphone. I kept wondering how much of it Nancy saw. Was she reading the same filth I was? Or had she grown so used to her own campaigns of destruction that she didn't even notice the damage anymore? The breaking point came when I received a call from the hospital. My parents had been in a car accident. The details blurred after that, the sterile smell of the emergency ward, the hushed voices of doctors telling me there was nothing they could do. I remember holding onto the edge of the hospital bed, my knuckles white, feeling like my chest had been split open. Later, the police told me they had found my father's phone. The call log showed repeated calls from Nancy minutes before the crash. She'd been trying to convince them to speak to me, to talk me out of filing for divorce. The thought that my parents' final moments had been spent listening to her voice made something inside me snap. I returned home with a single purpose: to find the jade pendant my mother had given me when I turned 18. It was more than jewelry, it was a promise, a reminder that no matter what happened, my family's legacy would remain with me. When I couldn't find it, I tore through every drawer, every box, every hidden compartment. Nancy came home while I was still searching. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her tone almost curious. "The jade pendant, my family heirloom," I said without looking at her. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The pure white one?" "Yes, give it to me." Her eyes darted away. "I lost it a month ago. Edward liked it, so I gave it to him. He lost it after that." The words didn't register at first. Then they did, and the air in the room felt heavier. I stepped toward her, my voice low. "That was my mother's. I told you what it meant to me." She reached for me, but I pushed her hand away. "Ben, I'll have a copy made. You won't know the difference." I stared at her, my hands shaking. "You don't replace history. You don't replace family." The next moments are a blur, her voice in my ear, my pulse pounding, the kitchen light too bright. I remember the cold handle of the knife, the way it felt natural in my grip. I remember her shouting my name, her hands grabbing at me, trying to stop me as the world tilted. When I woke in the hospital, the white walls felt suffocating. There were bandages around my neck, the dull ache of stitches pulling at my skin. The doctors spoke of depression, of exhaustion, of the need for a safe environment. Sandra was there, standing at the foot of the bed. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed by concern. "You don't have to stay here," she said quietly. "I can take you somewhere better." I didn't have the strength to argue. Sandra moved me to a rehabilitation center far from the city. It was surrounded by gardens, the kind my mother would have loved. She visited often, bringing small things to make the place feel less like a cage. Books she thought I'd enjoy, fresh fruit, even a chessboard. I didn't say much at first. Words felt heavy, but she didn't push. For the first time in months, I felt the faint edges of pee. And that was until I saw him. It was a fleeting glimpse, a figure moving along the far edge of the garden. Tall, with Edward's gait. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks, that Edward wouldn't be here. But the unease lingered. Sandra noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked one afternoon as we walked along the path. "I thought I saw Edward," I admitted. She stopped, her eyes narrowing. "Then I'll find out if it was him." A week later, Sandra called me into a small private room. 2 people sat inside, their faces bruised, hands tied. "This one," she said, pointing to the man, "is Edward. The other is his sister. She's the one you saw here." My pulse spiked. Sandra removed the gag from the woman. She started speaking quickly, panic in her voice. "Edward told me to change your medication dosage. He said if you didn't get better, Nancy would never take you back." I turned to Edward. "Why?" I asked. He laughed, but it was brittle. "Because she never loved you. I was always the one she wanted. You were just the person she blamed when she was bored. I wasn't going to let you get better and ruin what we had." I stared at him for a long moment. "There is no we, Edward. Not for you and not for her." Sandra's hand was warm on my shoulder. "We can make them disappear," she said softly. I shook my head. "Give them to Nancy. Let her decide what to do." Sandra frowned. "You're not going to forgive her, are you?" I almost smiled. "No, but I want her to see what kind of man she chose." Sandra didn't press. Instead, she began making plans for us to leave the country. "A fresh start," she called it. "Somewhere she can't reach you." Months later, I was back in a city. 5 years had passed since I'd last walked its streets. News had spread that Nancy had been kneeling in public, begging for me to return. The headlines painted her as a tragic figure, a once proud heiress now alone. Sandra saw the articles and laughed without humor. Do they think I'm invisible? At the airport, Nancy stood waiting with a bouquet. Her smile was brittle, her eyes scanning me for any sign of softness. I walked past her, Sandra's hand firmly in mine. We're getting married, I told the reporters. The cameras caught everything, her stillness, the bouquet slipping from her fingers, the way her mouth opened but no words came. Later, she sent me a video. Edward, tied to a chair, his face bloodied. I took care of him, she said in the message. Will you forgive me now? I deleted it without replying. 2 days later, she received an electronic invitation to my wedding. It was the last message I ever sent her. On the day of the ceremony, I didn't see her. Only afterward did I learn she had been there, standing in a corner, watching. The next morning, the news broke. Nancy Lee was dead, suicide by overdose. When Sandra told me, I felt nothing, no relief, no sadness, only a quiet certainty that the chapter was closed. Nancy had taken enough from me. Now, finally, she could take nothing more. The days after Nancy's death were unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Even with the wedding behind me, with Sandra by my side, there was an edge to that silence, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I stayed away from the news. Whenever her name flashed across a headline, Sandra would either change the channel or close the page before I could read it. She thought she was protecting me, but the whispers still reached my ears. Some said I'd married too quickly, that Nancy had died of heartbreak. Others claimed the wedding was my final act of revenge. I told myself I didn't care. Then the envelope arrived. It was plain white, my name printed in sharp black ink, no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet, 7 words written in familiar slanted script. She didn't die, she's coming for you. I read it twice, the handwriting was unmistakable, Nancy's. I'd seen her write to-do lists in that same style, notes she'd leave on the kitchen counter, but I'd also seen the photographs from her funeral, the closed casket draped in white lilies. I'd seen the official death notice. My first thought was that it was a cruel joke. My second was that, if it wasn't, I had underestimated her yet again. Sandra noticed the change in my expression the moment she stepped into the study. What's that? I handed her the paper without speaking. She read it once, her brow furrowing. It's a trick, she said finally. Someone wants to rattle you. Probably one of Edward's old allies. Edward. Even hearing his name brought back the memory of him tied to a chair, bloodied and broken in the video Nancy had sent me. He'd been her weapon for years. Maybe he still was. I need to know if this is real, I said quietly. Sandra crossed her arms. If you chase after this, you're letting her win again, dead or alive. I'm not chasing, I told her. I'm making sure we're not walking blind into something. That night, I called an investigator I trusted. Within days, he was back with something strange. Nancy's death certificate existed, but there were inconsistencies in the hospital's logbook. The official time of death didn't match the coroner's report. Security footage from the hospital's back entrance was missing for the same night. When I pressed him for a conclusion, he hesitated. Either someone forged those records, he said, or she had help disappearing. The thought lodged itself in my mind like a thorn. If Nancy had faked her death, it wasn't just to vanish quietly, it was to move without being watched, which meant she had a reason to come back. 2 weeks later, that reason walked right into my life. Sandra and I had just left a dinner meeting when a black SUV pulled up beside us. The window rolled down, and there she was, Nancy, alive. She looked different, thinner, her hair cut shorter, a faint scar along her jawline. But her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, assessing, unyielding. Henry, she said, her lips curling into something between a smile and a warning. Miss me? Sandra's hand tightened on my arm, but I stepped forward. You're supposed to be dead. Supposed to be, she agreed. But you know me, I don't like being predictable. I wanted to ask her why. Why fake it? Why come back? But she didn't give me the chance. I'm not here to ruin your little marriage, she said, glancing at Sandra. I'm here for something that belongs to me. What could I possibly have that you want? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You'll find out soon enough. The SUV pulled away, leaving the smell of expensive perfume and gasoline in its wake. Sandra turned to me immediately. "She's playing a game. Don't give her what she wants." I nodded, but the truth was, I didn't know what she wanted, or how far she'd go to get it. 2 nights later, I found out. I came home to find my office ransacked. Papers littered the floor, drawers pulled open, the safe cracked. Only one thing was missing: the original contract from the day Nancy and I were married. It wasn't worth much financially, but it was worth everything to someone who wanted leverage. That contract contained clauses neither of us had ever made public, clauses that, if revealed, could dismantle Sandra's current business partnerships by dragging my name back into the chaos. Sandra sat across from me at the kitchen table that night, her jaw tight. "She's not after money, she's after position. If she leaks that contract, half the investors I just secured will walk." "Then she's not here for me," I said slowly. "She's here for you." Sandra shook her head. "No, Henry, she's here for us." The next day, an email arrived from an encrypted address. No greeting, no signature, just a scanned copy of the contract and a line of text. "Dinner. Friday, alone." Sandra wanted to come with me. I refused. If Nancy wanted me alone, it was because she had calculated that Sandra's presence would shift the balance of power. I needed to see what her endgame was without any distractions. The restaurant was dimly lit, expensive in a way that made the air itself feel heavy. Nancy was already there, dressed in black, her hair swept back. She looked more like the woman I'd married than the one who'd mocked me in public years ago. "You're looking well," she said as I sat down. I ignored the pleasantry. "What do you want?" She leaned back, swirling the wine in her glass. "A trade. I give you the contract, untouched. You give me access to Zhao Holdings' South Asia expansion portfolio." It was absurd. That portfolio represented 2 years of work, billions in projected revenue, and the foundation of my next decade in business. "You must be out of your mind," I said. "Then I suppose the contract will have to find its way to the right hands," she replied smoothly. For a moment, I said nothing, then I asked the question that had been festering since the SUV window rolled down. "Why fake your death?" Her smile faded, replaced by something sharper. "Because the people I owed wouldn't stop coming, because you, despite everything, were the only one I could disappear through. Your grief was my alibi." I felt the weight of those words settle on me. She had used my pain as a shield, and now she wanted to use my company as her ladder. "I'll think about it," I said finally. Her eyes narrowed. "You have 3 days. After that, Sandra's deals become mine to ruin." As I walked out of the restaurant, I knew there was no thinking to be done. Nancy had declared war again, only this time, she was fighting with the ghost of our past and the weapon of my future. Sandra was waiting at home. The moment she saw my face, she knew. "She's not stopping until she takes something from you." I shook my head. "No, she's not stopping until she takes everything from us." The next move would have to be mine. 3 days. That was the deadline Nancy had given me. 72 hours to decide whether I would hand over Zhao Holdings' South Asia portfolio in exchange for the contract she had stolen. 72 hours to decide if I would give her the weapon she needed to climb back into power. Sandra wanted to fight her head on. "We go public," she said. "We tell the truth before she can twist it. Once the investors hear it from us, she loses her leverage." But that wasn't the problem. Nancy wasn't relying on public outrage this time. She was counting on whispers, on the kind of quiet doubt that makes business partners pause before signing deals. She could bleed us without ever stepping into the light. The first day, I tried to think logically. I reviewed every clause in that old marriage contract, every possible angle that could make it harmless if released. There weren't many. We'd both signed things back then that would look ugly under scrutiny. Non-disclosure agreements about financial transfers, asset allocations that could be spun as fraudulent if taken out of context. The truth wouldn't matter, perception would. The second day, I tried to track her down. The investigator followed her to 3 different locations, each one more carefully chosen than the last. Private clubs, short meetings in parked cars, back entrances to hotels. She was always moving, always watching for tails. She knew I was looking. By the morning of the 3rd day, Sandra could see the decision tightening around me like a noose. You can't give her what she wants, she said. Not again. I looked at her, really looked at her. She had stood by me through the ugliest parts of my life. She had watched me fall apart and still chosen to stay. If I gave Nancy this portfolio, I wouldn't just be betraying the company, I'd be betraying Sandra. That afternoon, Nancy called. You've had time to think, she said. I want your answer. I'll give it to you in person, I told her. Midnight, the old Jow warehouse. There was a pause. You've gotten braver, she said finally. Or dumber. Maybe both. The warehouse was an abandoned relic from my grandfather's time in the business. 3 stories of steel and concrete, no security cameras, no neighbors to hear anything they shouldn't. I arrived first, the echo of my footsteps carrying through the open space. At exactly midnight, headlights swept across the far wall. Nancy stepped out of a sleek black car, the contract in one hand, a small black case in the other. You've made the right choice, she said, her heels clicking on the concrete as she walked toward me. I didn't say I was giving you anything, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. Then this conversation ends now. I took a step forward. You wanted me here because you think you're still in control, but you're not. This ends tonight, one way or another. She tilted her head, studying me. Still trying to play the hero, Henry? You're not built for it. You've always been better at enduring than at fighting. Maybe I'm done enduring. Her fingers tightened on the contract. You hand over the portfolio, I disappear. You get your clean slate. Sandra gets to keep her precious investors. And if I don't? Her smile was sharp. Then I ruin you both. Piece by piece. I could hear the faint hum of an engine outside, the second car I had been expecting. Sandra stepped into the light, her eyes locked on Nancy. You always did overestimate yourself, Sandra said. You think you're the only one who knows how to play dirty. Nancy's gaze flicked between us. So this is your grand plan? A united front? How romantic. Sandra didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a slim folder and tossed it onto the ground between us. Nancy bent to pick it up, curiosity winning over caution. The folder contained photographs, bank statements, and signed affidavits, evidence of Nancy's dealings with offshore shell companies, money funneled through accounts in Edward's name, payments to the PR firm that had run the smear campaign against me. She flipped through the pages, her composure faltering for the first time. This is nothing, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's enough, I told her. Enough to bury you for real this time, not the fake funeral you staged, an actual end. You disappear on my terms, or I make sure every name in that file lands on the desk of someone who will use it. Nancy's eyes hardened. You think you can scare me with paperwork? You forget who taught you half the games you play now. I didn't forget, I said. I just learned to play them better. The tension stretched between us, the air heavy with the weight of years of unspoken words. Then she laughed, a low, bitter sound. You really think Sandra will stay with you once this is over? Men like you are only interesting when you're broken. The moment you win, you become ordinary. She'll get bored. They always do. Sandra stepped forward then, her voice steady. The difference between you and me, Nancy, is that I don't need Henry to be broken to love him. I chose him at his worst. I'll keep choosing him at his best. For a moment, something flickered in Nancy's expression, something almost human. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask she had worn for so long. She dropped the contract to the floor. You think you've won, but people like me don't lose. We just wait for the next opening. I bent, picked up the contract, and tore it in half, then into quarters, letting the pieces fall like ash between us. This was your last opening, I said. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. She turned on her heel, walking back toward the black car. The driver opened the door, and she paused just long enough to look over her shoulder. Don't sleep too soundly, Henry. The world's full of ghosts. When she was gone, Sandra let out a breath she had been holding. You think she's done? She's never done, I said, but she's finished here. The following days were a blur of damage control. We tightened our security, cut ties with any vendors who had indirect connections to Nancy's network, and quietly reinforced our agreements with investors. Sandra handled the business side with precision. I focused on making sure Nancy's name became a warning, not a threat. A week later, Edward resurfaced. He called from a number I didn't recognize, his voice low and hurried. She's not going to stop, Henry. She's already moving on something bigger, something that'll drag you both down. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm tired of being her weapon, and because if she burns you, she'll burn me too." He wouldn't give details over the phone. We agreed to meet in a small cafe far from the city center. Edward looked older, the arrogance drained from his face. "She's been talking to your competitors overseas," he said. "She's offering them information, real information, about your expansion plans. They'll undercut you before you even launch." It was exactly the kind of move I should have expected. She had lost the contract, but not her instinct for sabotage. When I returned home, Sandra was already on the phone, rallying our legal team. "We'll block every channel she could use," she said. "It'll take time, but we can shut her out." That night, lying awake beside her, I realized something. The confrontation at the warehouse hadn't been about the contract or the portfolio. It had been about the fact that Nancy and I were still locked in the same cycle we'd been in since the day we met: attack, counterattack, retreat, repeat. The only way to win was to step out of the game entirely. 2 weeks later, we announced a strategic delay in the South Asia launch, citing market conditions. Behind the scenes, we rerouted every critical asset into newly formed subsidiaries with no visible ties to Zhao Holdings. By the time Nancy's information reached my competitors, it would be outdated, useless. The final message came in the form of a single photograph slid under my office door late one evening. It was a picture of Nancy, sitting at a table in some nameless cafe, a cup of coffee in front of her. On the back, in that same familiar script, were 3 words: "Until next time." I stared at it for a long while before slipping it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Sandra asked me later what it was. "Nothing that matters anymore," I said. Because for the first time since I'd met Nancy Lee, I understood something I should have realized years ago. The real victory wasn't in destroying her, it was in living a life she could never touch. The photograph Nancy left me stayed hidden in my desk for days. I didn't look at it often, but knowing it was there kept my mind on edge. She wasn't gone, not really. She had simply changed her angle of attack. If I wanted this to end, I had to make sure there was no next time. Sandra was the first to notice the shift in me. "You're too quiet," she said one morning over coffee. "You've made your moves, Henry. You've won." "Not yet," I told her. "Winning means she can't come back." The first step was to dismantle every connection Nancy still had in the business world. Edward became my reluctant ally. He knew her methods, the people she trusted, the debts she'd left unpaid. For the first time since I'd known him, his motives aligned with mine: self-preservation. Together, we drew a map of her remaining influence. It wasn't as extensive as it had once been, but the roots were deep. While Sandra tightened our corporate defenses, I began calling in favors. Every investor she'd approached, every supplier she'd charmed, every journalist who'd ever written about her without fact-checking, one by one, I made sure they understood that associating with Nancy came at a cost they couldn't afford. The message spread quickly: Nancy Lee was toxic. She didn't stay silent. Anonymous blogs began posting about my vindictive campaign, painting me as an insecure man who couldn't stand to see a woman succeed without him. In the past, those whispers might have worked. Now, they fizzled out almost immediately. Sandra had already secured exclusive interviews where we laid out the truth, backed by the same evidence we'd used at the warehouse. The public was tired of Nancy's games. The narrative had shifted. It wasn't enough. She still had one last card: the stolen information Edward had warned me about. Even outdated, it could be manipulated to cause trouble in the right hole. And I needed it gone. Edward told me where she was keeping it: a safety deposit box in a private bank on the edge of the city, registered under an alias she'd used before. The bank prided itself on discretion, but Edward knew someone inside. It took weeks of careful maneuvering, but eventually, I had what I came for. When I opened the box, I expected files, maybe a USB drive. Instead, I found a leather-bound journal. Inside were notes in Nancy's handwriting, meeting records, deal outlines, personal reflections. Some pages were business strategy, others were venom disguised as diary entries, cataloging every slight she believed I'd committed. The most recent entry was dated only a week earlier. "He still thinks this is about money. It's not. It's about making sure he never forgets me." Reading it, I realized something. For all her ambition and cunning, Nancy's obsession wasn't with winning, it was with being unforgettable. If I erased her influence entirely, she'd lose the only thing she'd been fighting for. So I did exactly that. I leaked pieces of the journal to carefully chosen sources. Not enough to give her any power, but enough to reveal her manipulations, her betrayals, her admissions of schemes against not just me but others in her circle. Within days, her remaining allies abandoned her. Contracts she'd been chasing fell through. Her name became a warning whispered in corridors. Don't deal with her, don't trust her. I expected her to lash out, but instead, she sent me a message. No threats, no bargaining, just 3 words. You've erased me. Sandra saw it on my phone. Then it's over, she said. I wasn't so sure. People like Nancy didn't vanish quietly. 2 months passed without a word. Sandra and I focused on rebuilding, on launching the South Asia expansion through our newly formed subsidiaries. The delay had worked in our favor. The market was even more receptive than we'd projected. For the first time in years, I could feel momentum without the shadow of sabotage behind it. Then Edward called again. She's leaving the country, he said. She bought a one-way ticket under another alias. If you want to end this, now's your chance. Sandra didn't want me to go. She's not worth your time, Henry. She's already lost. She's lost here, I said. But she'll start over somewhere else, and one day, she'll look for me again. I met Nancy at the airport. She was alone, dressed simply, carrying only a small suitcase. When she saw me, her expression didn't change. Come to see me off? She asked. No, I said. I came to make sure you don't come back. She smiled faintly. You've destroyed my reputation, my network, my future. What more do you want? Your word, I said. That you'll never set foot in my life again. Her laugh was quiet, almost tired. And if I don't give it? Then I'll make sure every place you try to start over hears your story before you arrive. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't before. Not anger, not arrogance, but resignation. You really can't forgive, can you? Forgiveness is for people who regret what they've done, I said. You never have. She studied me for a long moment, then extended her hand. You have my word, Henry. This is the last time you'll see me. I didn't take her hand. Instead, I stepped aside and let her pass. She didn't look back. When I returned to the car, Sandra was waiting. Well? She's gone, I said. For good. I nodded. As good as it gets. The months that followed were the first truly peaceful ones I could remember. Sandra and I built something together that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with progress. Our expansion launched successfully, our partnerships grew stronger, and my name, our name, was no longer tied to scandal. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Nancy. Not with longing, not even with hate, just a kind of detached awareness that she had once been the center of my world and now was nothing more than a memory. That was the real victory, not the contracts, not the headlines, not even her exile. The victory was living a life she could no longer touch. One evening, months later, a package arrived at my office. Inside was the jade pendant my mother had given me. No note, no sender, just the pendant, polished and gleaming as if it had never been lost. I held it for a long time, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Sandra stepped in, saw it, and asked, "Where did you find that?" "It found me," I said. We didn't speak of it again. Some things didn't need explaining. I placed the pendant back in its original place in my home, where it belonged, not as a reminder of the past, but as proof that some things survive even the worst storms. That night, standing on the balcony with the city lights below, Sandra beside me, I realized the cycle was truly over. Nancy had tried to make herself unforgettable. In the end, the only lasting thing she left me was the clarity to see what mattered. And that clarity was worth more than any revenge.